is government? What a basic question. That is where we are today, where we are asking this very deep question. What is government? What is the point of it even? Do we even need it? That is what we are going to get into, because I have a very special guest with me to explore this very interesting topic. But before that, I want to give you a hot tip, right? So I have Noel with me, who is going to be our union leader of spectators today
Noel Cordeiro.
in studio.
Professional amateur.
Professional amateur. He's a comedian and podcaster, and he was in a very popular episode called How to Enter Politics. So this is actually a continuation of that, I'm guessing, Noel?
Yeah. Yes.
पहले politics आओ, फिर government बनाओ, फिर चुतियाप करो.
A whole lifetime of doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Explained in 3.
Exactly. So the hot tip I'm about to give you is about how to identify a nerd. Right, so this person sitting before me is his name is Subhashish Bhadra, okay, and he has written this book called The Cage Tiger: How Too Much Government is Holding Indians Back. Right, now the way to identify a nerd is you open the book, right, you see the last page, kahan pe khatam ho raha hai, 254. Then you see how many pages are left. Those are all notes and illustrations and references, and that's 50 pages, man.
Yeah, you have to convince people you've done your research.
Yeah,
कोई
exactly.
खरीदेगा नहीं वरना.
Yeah, exactly. This is what a sign is. So this is a hot tip for you guys, because when I wrote my book and when I continue to write my new non-fiction, मेरे पास ये कुछ भी नहीं है पीछे.
You know what I'm going to do? When I write my book, I'm just taking these 50 pages.
That's a good idea. That's another way to prove that you're a nerd. Yeah. But Subhashish, thank you so much. You are an economist by training, and you're a Rhodes Scholar. Yeah, and you have written this book. And also you have worked extensively in public policy. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. As you rightly said, I am an economist by training. Didn't end up doing much in economics though. Instead decided to enter public policy, where I was working on issues around technology policy. I was working on issues around Aadhaar, data privacy, data governance, etc. So that's what I did for 5 years. Decided at some point about 2 years ago to leave all of that and just join a startup and start working as an operator in fintech. So I think I at this point still feel very confused about what I have done. But somewhere along the way I decided to also write this book, because I think after 5 years of spending time in public policy and being in certain discussions in certain rooms, etc., at some point said, "Kya, I'm sure people outside these rooms are also interested in this topic, so let's write a book that possibly some more people can read outside of these things." So that's how this book came about.
That's always a maybe though. Are people outside interested in this topic? I have always thought of that. It's a maybe from me.
I don't know. I lean yes. I think they care about it. It's just that you have to kind of break it down so that it's more easily it becomes a more conversational topic.
Noel, do you think people are interested?
If it's on a reel, yes.
If it's on a reel, yes. That's a better way to put it. Like 1 minute में बोल पाता है तो बोल, वरना it's just pointless basically. Can you do reels, by the way? So
I have just learned it for this book.
Huh?
Oh, really?
For the book promotion, I made my first reel for the book promotion. I think it came out well. You should check it out later.
Okay. Yeah. Instagram handle will flash somewhere, so please check it out.
Another nerd alert. He tells you, let's check out my reel.
But the topic we are dealing with today is what is government, because you've written this interesting book which is titled dramatically Caged Tiger, and how too much government is holding Indians back. You really like the subtitle, right? What did you think when you
so actually I don't know what he means by too much government, but what it sparked in my head was during the pandemic, I happened to discover this economist called Milton Friedman. And he was talking about at that time in the 80s how the number of laws in the US just keeps increasing. And hence, like, you can't step out of your house without breaking at least one of those laws. So I'm guessing too much government kind of means in that zone. And like that kind of, and anytime you step out of your house to do anything government related, there's like a million things you have to do and a million intricacies. And sometimes they're just backwards. Like logically they are backwards. Like you it doesn't make sense. Like it is more an impediment to what you want to do, and because the machinery is so opaque, you don't really know why you're doing it. So it always feels like the system is holding you back because of that, and you can never pinpoint why. And sometimes when you pinpoint why, you realize, oh, we don't really need this.
Exactly, and I think many people argue that laws are written in a way that you're meant to be in violation of it, so that someday if you need to be caught, you can be caught.
Yes.
But what do you think? Like, I mean, was he correct in what he described?
I absolutely think so. I mean, in fact, there are, when I was doing research for this, I read up lists of some absurd laws that India has, and some of them are really, really absurd. It's about like how the traffic police is supposed to wear clothes and how you're not supposed to beat drums, and if someone does, like these really absurd colonial laws, which for some strange reason have survived 75 years of our independence and still exist. And of course, these are obviously nobody knows about them because hopefully they've never been enforced. But then you go from something like that to something like the current marriage equality conversations. I'm like, yeah, why does it matter to you who I marry? Right. So I think both from the kind of small things to these kind of big, really consequential things, I think there's too much government. But when I also speak about too much government, I also say that laws are written, the way laws are written, the way powers of governments are defined, etc., it's somewhat arbitrary. And I think it's not just about cutting down the number of laws, but whatever laws are existing, usko be writing it in a way that it is much easier for people to actually meet those laws and understand them, etc. And there's some kind of fair process that happens. So that's that's the loaded term behind too much government here.
You know, so this podcast is called Explain Like I'm 10. And I want to like take it to the very basics. Like, as you said, you know, people are interested only after, you know, they understand the basics. And I feel like this question is not really asked very often, what is government? And I feel like that is a very important question to ask, because when you start asking it, you enter a big rabbit hole, which is forms of government. What does it do? What does it even mean? What effect does it have on society, etc. Right? So let's start from there, guys. What is government? Like,
so once we decided to record this, I actually looked up where did the word originate from. So apparently it originates from a Greek word, which is to steer the rudder. So in a way, government in that sense means something that is steering the rudder, I presume, of a society or a nation. But the way government is actually, in my opinion, how we can really encapsulate government is it is a group of people who set rules and who enforce rules. That's simply what government means. Now the question is, why do we need someone to set and enforce rules? It is because I mean, in economics, what's called the prisoner's dilemma problem. But long story short, it is that if everyone pursues their own self-interest, कि कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता और बाकी सब क्या कर रहे हैं. In most cases, that is perfectly fine and that leads to better societal outcomes. But sometimes that's not true. For example, someone has to say कि यार road के left side चलना है, right side चलना है. Someone has to create that rule. And then once created, someone has to enforce that rule. Similarly, in a country like India, मतलब ज़्यादा लोग काम करेंगे, they will get more income, etc. It's better for them, but someone has to draw the line and say, yeah, you can't make people work for more than X hours a day. So setting those rules which prevent people from doing things which might harm the rest of the society or collectively improve their condition is the role that the government, or that's what I call in the book, I kind of call them institutions. So these are institutions, these are rules, laws, regulations. And wo banane ke liye and enforce karne ke liye, you need another entity which is called the government. So in a very simple way, government is any body which creates and enforces rules. The other way to look at government, which is the more cynical way of looking at government, is to say it is the only form of legally sanctioned violence in society.
Yes. I was going to come to that, Subhashish. Thank you for that, because I was just about to say that government sounds like my baap. Whenever so Noel, like when I ask you what is government, what would you think of?
I think it's the person I hold accountable for anything going wrong. Like the few things in my life that I have no control over, like my water, my electricity and water, I don't have the time or the energy to make sure it works. You know, as he said, traffic laws and whatnot. These are things I shouldn't be worrying about while I'm going through my day-to-day thing. So these are the guys who I hold accountable for.
Right.
You know, like from a citizen's perspective, if this stuff is not working, then I'm pissed. Then I be like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Like, so for me, government is more like a person, which I think when he mentioned that they're institutions, I was like, oh wait, you can't really have a face attached to a government because that face changes. Like, you know, that face is loaded. But what endures is the institution. Right. So I think in my head and most citizens' head, government is always a person who is doing things. So it almost feels personal when they are screwing you over.
That makes sense. So Subhashish says that it is a body which is supposed to set rules for the betterment / so that we don't harm each other in society. You say it is a person who is supposed to do shit for you, which is basically just pani de mere ko, khana de mere ko, you know what? Khana nahi, but like
pani वगैरह is basic, but my point is कि all the thing that we don't
services.
think about keeping society stable.
Okay,
That's
basic
their job.
needs would be...
Yeah, basic needs, law and order, that's the kind of stuff that where I know I cannot do this stuff. Like coming over here, example, whatever I took, the train, the bus, the restaurant I ate in and whatnot, to make sure that these comply certain standards. That's the government's job.
Sure. That makes sense. And you know what my thing was that when I first interacted with government, it was when I took my driving license. I mean, that is usually one of the places where young people tend to interact with government first, I would say. Either that or maybe the first time they go to vote. Maybe that is when, again, that's not technically government interaction, but you know, like how that works. Or crime. Whenever they have to go to a police station, whenever they get fined, whenever... so essentially what is happening is when I went to do this license, right? I was this idealistic young chap at full age of 17, learning license lene gaya tha. I was like... So obviously agents came, RTO mein, and they were like, sir, abhi 15 minute mein license de denge. And I was like, no, I will not bribe. I will go through the entire process. Took me 5 days.
Yikes.
It was a nightmare because I could see what happened is that I was standing in line. There were like some 2-3 other fuckers like me who were also standing in line, just like idealism. हमको टेस्ट करवाया, फेल किया 3 बार, वापस बुलाया. Then we were made to drive the thing, like you know, like on like but other people were allowed to do it on their vehicle. We had to procure a Luna.
Okay.
So I had to find someone who has a Luna. Then I had to do it. But while others are just like casually doing it on their own, they don't even stop in line. They just come in from the gate, they did an 8 and went away.
Yeah.
By signing the paper while they are on the vehicle, while we are standing here waiting for... That was my first interaction with government and I hated it. Right? And the one impression that I got from that as a young person is that ye log my baap hai. They don't think that we deserve anything good.
My driving test was very different. It was literally आपको 8 wait कराया. मुझे it was literally I drove 10 meters. So they were like literally from point A to that point B, drive these 10 meters and then show your hand signals and all of that. So my impression therefore of government when I had that experience was to say कि यार I have come, and this was somewhere, I was in the outskirts of Calcutta, so this was like some 50-60 kilometers away. I'm like, this is what I drove 50-60 kilometers for. So my idea of government was, okay, this is like something inefficient, but you have to kind of cross that hurdle to actually get what you want to do.
So you thought it was inefficient. I thought it was evil. You thought?
I am extremely cynical of government.
Okay.
Like honestly, Aadhaar card, I have an Aadhaar card which I made when I was 17. You're supposed to renew it every 10 years. I'm 28, going to be 29 this year. I'm not going to do it as long as I can put it off, because I'm like, what if they already have my old data? What if they have my new data? The point is like I'm always on guard when it comes to government, because I know any government institute. Like recently, I had to go to a police station and whatnot. It was not, as you said, just not pleasant. You know, it's very difficult to figure out what they are saying, because they are operating from a place of like, okay, we see 100 cases, and I just have my one case. So like the idea of, okay, we are in service for you, or like the idea that, okay, I am in service for every individual citizen, that is lost in the government, and that's lost anywhere else. So for me, it's always as you said, an obstacle to climb, someone who's against me all the time. And if I had a private option of that, like the agent, I'm totally ready to pay convenience fee.
Right.
I think government exists to make agents look better. It's that kind of hisab.
Like government exists to create middlemen who basically take stuff to make things happen. So, you know, Oxford English Dictionary or Cambridge Dictionary actually says government is an organization that officially manages and controls a country or region, creating laws, collecting taxes, providing public services, etc.
Oh.
that etc.
Even Oxford is like, this is government here. मतलब रवांडा में क्या चल रहा है मेरे को नहीं पता.
You know, so that's the thing. So like you're as a normal citizen, as a common person who does not really go deep into government or policy or how it works like we do, the interaction with the government matters, right? But in your book, you are actually giving a very interesting statistic about how 70% of Indians trust their government and how they think it's their Mai-Baap. Can you talk about that a little bit? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I think this is, I did think a lot about this because fact of matter is that the Indian government is among the most trusted governments globally. So if you do any kind of citizen surveys, people will say, yeah, I trust the Indian government more than in most other countries. It is a different matter that the toppers in that list are always kind of authoritarian countries, but let's keep that aside for a moment. But even cross-sectionally, India mein only businesses and governments are trusted to this extent. NGOs are trusted a lot less. Media is trusted a lot less. So there is that trust paradox that exists. And all said and done, I do think there is much to be loved about how the Indian government has performed over the last 7 or 8 decades, right? Just the very fact that elections happen, that people peacefully give away power no matter what they say. About whatever.
I like that phrase.
They say a lot, they cry foul, but they give away power. Then if you look at electricity, and I'm sure all of us complain that India electricity situation is really horrible.
It's like saying the bullying is very, very personal.
But like even if you look at something like electricity, India has poor electricity. Everyone will argue that there's not enough electricity for people. But if you control for apna jo level of income hai, India has actually done very well. Eradicating major diseases, etc. Right? So I think there's a lot that India has done right, and you have to just look at the neighborhood to understand where that is coming from. Right? So I think when people say that, look, I trust the government, I think it's a expression of hope. Ki yaar, matlab, I think people in general in India have been optimistic. And the second is that people, I think, look around and they're kind of thankful for it. And I think culturally also, we are taught from childhood ki yaar, matlab, obey the powerful, obey your family. And as a culture that's based on looking at your community as your family, you think, acha, the Prime Minister or the Chief Justice, they're like the topmost members of my family, so let me respect them.
As a smart man called Eric Cartman says, respect my authority.
The second is, I think we are also taught ki yaar, matlab, adjust kar lo, right? I mean, there's a certain bit of ki yaar, theek hai, road mein gadda hai, it's okay. Matlab, baki ka road to hai at least, right? So I think we are taught culturally to respect these things, and which is why I think there is a lot more respect for the Indian government than people kind of sitting in academia and the research space would imagine there is. But at the same time, if you look at people's everyday experiences, at least 40% of people, according to surveys, have said that they've paid a bribe.
Yeah. So that is the paradox there,
It's
right?
a paradox.
Which is what was confusing for me, right? You like on one hand, like a lot of people say, oh, we trust the government. But on the other hand, they say, yeah, generally we have a shitty experience with government. I don't get it. Why?
And I think this is the difference between, and this was in one of your previous episodes of the project which you were discussing, which is that there are things that are run, politicians come in, they set the narrative, and those things are kind of done in a certain way. Swachh Bharat ho gaya, or anything else, like these big programs, Aadhaar being rolled out. Obviously, lots of people are super proud of that. Lots of people are super proud of UPI, excited about ONDC. So I think the Indian government, where it puts its energy ki yaar, ye karna hai, it is able to do it to the satisfaction of most people. But government is a lot more than that, right? I mean, UPI is a small sliver in our everyday experience. At the end of the day, what you care is that pani aati hai, bijli aati hai. Like, if UPI, I kind of live in a part of Bangalore, which is kind of the tech hub, Koramangala. Everyone uses UPI. We, in fact, don't even use cash anymore. But वहाँ पर power cuts इतने होते हैं. And I'm always surprised. I'm like, this is the wealthiest part of Bangalore. Why are there so many power cuts? So I do think that people trust the government in the sense the grand narratives ki yaar, we've been an independent country, we've had elections, we've had democracy, we have some freedom of speech. But at the same time, the everyday experience is different, and people kind of live with that everyday experience, thinking ki this is perhaps the trade-off that I have to make. Ki, it's okay. 87, as Seema auntie says, 60-70% ही मिलेगा, and they adjust in that.
Yeah. Noel, I was thinking one of the factors might also be that government jobs is a big aspirational thing for most people, right? Which is like, government में job मिल जाए तो safety मिलेगा. That maybe it also feeds into that, right? Like,
I mean and it's not just government jobs. I remember when I had just started making some money, my mom was like, okay, just put it in the post put it, open an account in like a government bank, a nationalized bank. क्योंकि कुछ भी हो जाए government डूबने नहीं वाला है.
Right.
You know, it's that mentality that the government is all enduring, which is there, which I feel like feeds into this thing. That even though we despise government institutions, we are like, no, ye chalege. This will work, this will remain. And I think partly it could be because my parents, especially, they come from a generation where the government has been in charge for a much more longer time than private institutions in terms of like,
so familiarity.
Familiarity hai वगैरह. But I think that's a sentiment that still endures with people. Like when I go to a government hospital, for example, because when I used to work, I used to go to Tata Memorial Hospital because they were one of our clients, and it's partly trust and partly there are some government departments also that work over there, and it's surprising how much of a volume they take care of. Like so even hence the adjusting wala thing कि adjust तो करना पड़ेगा क्योंकि 100 करोड़ की आबादी को हम cater कर रहे हैं. You know what I mean? Like you don't complain at a langar basically. That's the whole
you don't complain. That's a nice saying.
Yeah. So that's the point. I think the expectation is managed when it comes to government wala thing. But then like just as you said, when it comes to bribing and whatnot, like I recently paid a good bribe to a police station, and my body language changed. Like before giving the bribe I was like this, after giving the bribe I was like this, because I felt like a customer now. More than
and you know what is tied to that, the feeling of essentially the government is not worth it, is when we pay taxes. Right, so like I mean that's a big feeling, right? And so I tried to do CA before this, failed at it, but I tried it, and one of the things that
I can see the formula on your arm.
Yeah, this is exactly it. But when I used to like get clients who used to file returns, right? This was one thing. Like 90% of them would be like, tax बचाना है obviously, but क्यों बचाना है? यार government क्या करता है हमारे लिए, right? I sort of also imbibed that feeling within myself until I got appendicitis, right? And I went to AIMS. I think of this very often now, where AIMS as an institution exists only because of the government, and how glorious it is, and how I spent 380 rupees, just 380 rupees for the best operation available in India, room, all the things, and it was just, I was like, magic. This is magic, right? Like, how is this happening in India in a government hospital, right? Then I also think of it when I go on highways. Like, nowadays when I go to like a Nainital or whatever, highways have become very like great. I mean, like in places. Of course, there are patchworks happening here and there. Whenever I think about paying taxes, I also think of these things now, which I'm grateful for, which are the good things.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people, for example, think in India, the private sector has come up, startups have come up. They're almost like detached from the universe of the government in some way. But most of those guys went to IIT, right? Most of them got subsidized education. So a lot of this private sector that has also come up has come up because of kind of that subsidization or the government investing 100%. In some of these infrastructures.
Yeah. Whenever there is like some sort of government program that is starting en masse, like for example, when I was working in a healthcare company, and the conversation, whole zone or whatever, East, West zone and all, people are meeting, and like the CEO is talking about stuff. And one of the things he was very excited about was, I think, government ka Ayush project.
Ayush project.
Yeah, so like he's like, with that happening, that's like an injection of so much more business. Like we can give so much more service and earn so much more money. So like the government bringing in, or rather bringing focus, which what Aparajit was saying, bringing focus to things definitely helps. Definitely makes life better.
And also one more factor to also remember here is that our interaction with the government also depends on privilege. It's also important to call out, because I've covered elections and been in villages where complete lives are dependent on the government. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? Because maybe that is also connected to the trust.
And in fact, recently there was a article by a former chief economic advisor of India saying that India mein right now you're seeing economic growth has slowed down a little bit. So why is there not much kind of political resistance to that? Why are people not speaking up more about this? And he said that, look, at the end of the day, we have as a country got much better at giving people kind of welfare schemes, right? कोई TV देता है, कोई mixie देता है, cycle देता है, etc. And that does constitute a large part of what people receive. Even if you look at the PDS, which is the free ration system, I don't know how many of us have used it. I've never used it even back in the day when it was universal. But for an average Indian who receives that is almost like 40 to 50% of the calories that they need in a day. Right? So the government in that sense is almost providing that to you extremely cheaply. And therefore, you're absolutely right. I mean, the lens with which people look at it is also, okay, I'm getting so much from the government. So whatever the problems I have, let me kind of not complain too much about it.
And the ration thing, I think 80 crore people are dependent on, or like they take some amount of ration and welfare from the government, which is a big number. I think it's the biggest welfare scheme in the world right now. And I mean, I understand it because, like people are often like, oh, welfare, freebies, etc. But when I went to UP, I realized during the pandemic, and that was such a stark thing, right? During the pandemic, people getting 500 rupees in their bank was a huge deal. People being able to get like 5 kilo chawal and rice from the nearby ration shop, which did come regularly, was a huge deal. And it was, I mean, we were looking at obviously the images of, bodies in the Ganga and all the things. And I was like, there is no way they like the government now. Right? But what I also realized after going there is like they were actually thankful that at least they survived and also survived well because of the money and the thing they were getting. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on that point a little bit about how much people dependent on the government. Also, when you judge a government, like the effectiveness of a government, how do you do it exactly?
Got it. So in terms of people's dependence on government, I think, as you rightly said, some of these schemes themselves are enough to move hundreds and millions of people out of or inside poverty.
Yes.
So if you just take the subsidy that is delivered through the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, through the PDS, through the fertilizer subsidy, which are the three biggest subsidies, that's enough to move hundreds and millions of people in or out of poverty. So it is an immense amount of subsidization that for good reason happens in the country. But to your question of how do you judge whether a government is good or not, for me, because I kind of think of government as a set of rules. And if you come to think of it, as you rightly said, as soon as you leave your house, you're governed by a bunch of rules. In fact, one might argue even inside your house, you're governed by a whole bunch of rules. So the question to me becomes, are we setting rules in a good way or not? So one is, are we actually writing down rules or not, and are we writing them tightly or not? So someone obviously like you who's worked in parliament, very often we write in very broad terms that this can be waived in public interest or public emergency. Like what do these terms mean? Right? So one is, are we writing our laws very tightly in a way that, people can't or government can't do whatever it wants, but it's almost becomes a contract between me as a citizen and the government. Ki, this much freedom you can take from me and this much service you're giving, that is okay. Don't take more freedom than that. So that's one. Is the law tightly written or not? Secondly, is there transparent kind of adherence to that law or not? That if I am standing there and for my driver's license, कोई मतलब ऐसे lane काट के मेरे सामने ना आ जाए, right? मतलब law should be uniform for everyone. Someone has to be enforcing it. And third and most importantly is that there has to be some independent oversight. If the government is judge and jury on its own action, then the government can do whatever it wants. Right? So there has to be an independent agency, which in our case is mostly the judiciary, or even people in a sense become independent oversight. So that is the third aspect of what makes a good government. So I think of government not in terms of कि GDP growth kitna hai and quality of life kitna hai, because that is affected by so many other factors, right? International markets kaise and all of that. I would say that we should judge a government by, is the process by which it makes a law and enforces a law, are those good processes or not? So that's what to me makes a good government.
If I may say so, like, tell me if this is a good idea, just a random idea. So I think Bhutan has the happiness index, which they actually judge a lot of things by, right? Which is, how happy are you as a citizen? Can the government's effectiveness be judged based on just the happiness of the citizen?
No.
No?
Because
Why?
I am depressed. I'm not happy anyway.
But think about it, right? No.
Okay, so if you define happiness index with those parameters, of course, I'm pretty sure you'll get a good, the average citizen is pretty happy. Like, for example, despite all the gripes of people saying कि bachelor को घर नहीं मिलता, I got a house pretty easily. You know, like it's in a place where there is decent water. It's in a place जहाँ पर stability है. You know, and we talk about how these are very explosive times and whatnot, but by and large, the country is quite stable. You know, by and large, there is optimism in people. By and large, businesses are growing. By and large, even arts are, despite of course censorship वगैरह जो भी रहेगा, that's more a social issue. But like, there is opportunity. I can basically, a person who's in their 20s can dream.
Right.
I think if that is a big factor. There is a lot of young people in our country and all of them are daring to dream now. It leads to a lot of conflict. Yes, it leads to a lot of conversation socially. It may seem that there's a lot of people who are at each other's throats. But at the end of it, on a resultant bolega ya fir like when the remainder of it is the fact that people are optimistic about things. So I think even if you don't want to call it something as dramatic as happiness index, I think people are satisfied.
Right.
Which is why people will go to polls and vote.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of voter turnout is like, oh, I want to be part of this party.
Yeah.
Like, this party called India. Like,
right.
That's the whole point.
So there's this thing I was reading about how the US has the right to pursuit of happiness. Right, which is very interesting, I thought, because it's not the right to happiness; it's the right to the pursuit of happiness. I think it's also interesting to sort of think of it that way, which is like, how happy is the citizen, the individual citizen, and can that individual citizen's happiness be increased through government intervention or through non-intervention? I would say, is that a good parameter to judge this? What would you say?
Look, I think the very practical challenges, right? Happiness is something that's so multidimensional that it's very
subjective.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to measure it. And second thing is, it's affected by so many things that might be independent of the government. Or that might be, as people say that India grows at night because India grows when the government is sleeping. So maybe our happiness is because of what happens after the government shuts down, right? So it's there are too many things that affect it. Obviously, as an economist, I say we have a GDP measure. By and large, it works. Many things are correlated to it. Let's probably just focus on that, because I think in general, a lot of things get correlated. With economic development, a lot of good things happen on their own. A lot of good things don't. So I am not in the camp that favors kind of the gross happiness index.
This is where we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back after the break to talk to Subhashish about why the government is shitty.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus and myself, that's Abbas, are joined by author Sagar Makwana to talk about his latest book, Be You Now. And we also discussed the story of a first-time flyer lighting a beedi on an airplane. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam talks to Ramesh Ranganathan, CEO at K. Raheja Corp. They discuss buyer behavioral patterns in real estate, the perennial question of buying versus renting property, and more. On The Wire Talks, Siddharth Bhatia talks to former External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid. They spoke about the Congress's victory in Karnataka elections and does the party have a strategic plan for the upcoming general elections. On Pulyabazi, Khyati, Saurabh and Pranay discuss how India should develop policy expertise in electronics manufacturing and emerge as an alternative to China in global supply chains. And on Explain Like I'm 10, Meghnad is joined by business journalist Aprajita Sharma and myself, comedian Abbas Momin, to try and answer the question, what is capitalism? Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcasts.com. We have some exciting stuff for you. Follow us on social media via IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, please spread the word, tell your friends and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening. You'll also find all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Cash Free Payments and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible.
Hello and welcome back to Explain Like I'm 10. I'm here with Subhashish, who has written a grand book called Cage Tiger, How Too Much Government is Holding Indians Back. And I'm here with Noel, who is the union leader of Spectators today. Noel, anything on the surface of your mind that you want to just get out before we go to the next part?
Yes.
Tell me.
Have there been new forms of government after democracy?
That's a good question.
I'm just wondering, like, after democracy, has that way of electing people and whatnot, has it changed?
I mean, look, I mean, to borrow a phrase, I think even when you say democracy, it's like 50 shades of grey, because the last I checked on the kind of Wikipedia page, there are only 4 countries in the world who believe they are not democracies. Everyone else believes they are a democracy. So clearly we are all just creating some kind of hybrid structures. And where this hybrid structure goes, we don't know. So in terms of something radical that's happened, probably not. There have been calls for some, but those have only been tried in kind of small city-states in ancient times. There's something called sortition, which says कि instead of electing people, just draw lots. तो फिर एक तो इलेक्शन का खर्चा बच गया. दूसरा है because they know they might not get re-elected, so they'll probably end up doing good things rather than like being the lure of getting re-elected, etc. But these have all been tried in very small kind of city-states kind of thing. So nothing grand that has happened in ever since democracy arose.
So basically draw lots as in randomize.
For those who want to, yeah. So people put in like, hey, I'm interested in being prime minister of the country. So you put forward your name, and then there's a draw of lots.
Oh, that's nice.
I mean, it's really radical. And when I first heard it, I'm like, what nonsense is this? But I think there's a lot of interesting things about why that might actually work better.
Yeah. And you never know. It's like a lottery then, basically, right? Like, I mean...
It's nice, dude. What did you get this Christmas? New government.
New government. I'm prime minister now. Very nice. But I'll actually come to that later, Noel, because I also had that question. I think I want to talk to that about that a little later, because now I want to talk about the main thrust of your book, which is how you say that too much government is a bad thing. Why do you make that claim?
So Firstly, I kind of put the title there as a clickbaity thing.
Of course, well done. It works.
I felt like clicking the book.
But here's the thing about government, which is, I think, a government which says that, look, I'm going to be open, I'm going to be transparent, people can come criticize me, people can participate in the lawmaking process. In my head, that's a good government. In India, we inherited a lot of the things right from the British. So many people argue, in fact, that for all that India has achieved in the last few years, we've actually just replaced a white elite with local elites and increasingly with goons. Right? So a lot of people end up believing that, and I think that is because we haven't done a wholesale rewriting of our laws. Our internet is still essentially, or many forms of surveillance in India determined by a law set in 1885. So how is that law going to be representative of what India is today? So what I'm arguing in this book is, we have to focus not just on like, if I don't like this prime minister or this chief minister, let's remove and get a new one, but saying that these nuts and bolts of our country need a wholesale rewiring. Just to give you an example, the fact that today, if the government has to do surveillance on my phone or my devices, etc., it needs no sorts of permission from the judiciary before doing it. If you take a country like the US or the Canada, you need a judicial warrant before you can go and tap someone's phone. And you can tap someone's phone based on relatively kind of flimsy arguments. And the problem then becomes that there's no kind of checks and balances that happen here. So that's the thrust of the book, which is to say that the government has to do some really, really complex things. But for you to be able to do these complex things better, it is important that you actually become more open, more transparent, etc. And in fact, I would argue even smaller. Because if you have a police force, which in India is anyway underfunded, and you say that police force has to do everything from like enforcing prohibition to catching murderers to like catching the minister's buffaloes or finding them again, it's really difficult for them to do that, right? So in that sense, we need to minimize the number of tasks that we give to each of our government bodies. Let's get better at doing those small tasks first, the most important task, the bijli, sadak, pani kind of tasks, and then let's go for the grand narratives of how do you enforce prohibition, or how do we decide what kind of things people eat? Is it really the government's business to determine who we marry, what we eat, etc., etc.? So that's what I'm trying to argue in this book.
This is actually one of my favorite topics, because having worked in the parliament, I have seen the crazy things. But the by far the craziest thing which I continue to believe is that we are not a democracy. And have you heard of the anti-defection law? No. So, you know this. Anti-defection law...
Okay, 1 second. 5 seconds, like 30 seconds ago, I wanted to break my phone because of what he said. Don't say anything that will make me want to burn my fingerprints and get a new identity. Okay.
You might want to rephrase that, because after you hear this, it will be interesting to see what you react. Okay, so anti-defection law. So it says that once you get elected, you can't change your party. right? Which is fine. ठीक है, तुमने पार्टी का टिकट लिया है, they elect हो गए. But it also says that if you are ordered by your party that you have to vote on a bill in a certain way, you have to do it. If you don't do it, you get kicked out of parliament and legislative assemblies.
Okay, so the guy who I elect, the representative, has to by law follow the party line.
Yeah.
That's
the party whip. So essentially what that effectively means is that, let's say currently the BJP is in majority, right? So essentially one person is literally taking a call on all laws.
Oh dude, I thought this wasn't a thing. But
Even
it is.
And just to give you context, right? I mean, other countries also have anti-defection laws or have laws of the whip. They have whips and all of that. Many parliamentary countries have. But even in England, where they have these kind of whip system, if you defy a whip, you aren't removed from parliament.
Yeah.
Your promotions within the party or your positions the party appoints to, those might get affected, but you aren't altogether removed, which is why, in fact, interestingly, one entire chapter in my book is exactly about this, which is to say that the people that we are electing actually don't have they don't have the resources. I mean, if a person starts, if a MP starts doing his job and reading all the bills and reading all the committee reports and all of that, that's humanly impossible. They don't have time to do that, and they don't get much support. I think they get some 40,000-50,000 to hire some help, which is insufficient. If you look in the US, they get very generous allowances to have an office around them. India, we don't even support our MPs in that way. And the second thing is MP, even if we support them and MP forms a perspective, what can they do with it? They are supposed to vote the way the party tells them to vote. And many people have argued that because of this reason, we have so many parties. Because if I'm an ambitious politician, but I cannot vote any other way, I'll just form my own party. Right? And which is then therefore leading to that kind of fragmentation in our politics.
And you know, the funny thing is, so because I was working with a chief whip, I have actually written a whip. You know, like the 3-line whip as they call it. And it is the most amazing, powerful feeling I had ever had because we had to... So the 3-line whip says you have to be present and you have to vote in a certain way that the party tells you. We had drafted this letter. And then my MP had a brainstorm. Why don't we just text them? You know, why do we do this whole thing about actually printing things out and doing this? Because ultimately, ऐसा कोई बोलता थोड़ी है कि like 3-line whip has to be on paper and you have to deliver it. Just text them. So we just started texting people 3-line whips, and that works. I mean, like, yeah, nobody's telling us, right? I mean, like, how to do that job. As in the chief whip, he just has to summon people and do it. The most interesting
This is like Mean Girls, by the way. This is a lot like Mean Girls.
It gets worse, right? Just to tell you how it looks like on the ground, right? So the most bizarre thing. So like, you know, when the parliament was on, imagine the parliament is on, there's the GST bill or something being discussed, very intense. Everybody's life changes because of this law that is happening. All MPs there from your party know that they just have to look at the whip. They don't need to know the law. They don't need to read the law. Because kya hi matter karta hai, right? Now the whip basically has already spoken to the party boss and taken their orders ki whether we have to vote yes or no or abstain. Now in front of them there are 3 buttons. There's a green, yellow and red, right? So they just keep looking at the whip when the voting happens, and the whip either goes this or this. And based on that, their vote is decided, right? So think about it this way, right? So it makes the entire process of legislation and parliament so ineffective that these people are essentially meat bags who are pressing buttons. So they can be replaced by anyone, right?
By AI.
Or
we don't even need AI. We just need a simple algo.
Yeah, I mean, it just, like, when I saw that actually happen, my faith in democracy or the parliament itself just like vanished.
Can you do the opposite of
restoring faith in democracy?
No, I'm talking about how you can't like promote a party at an election booth, but can you tell people don't vote at an election booth? Is that against the law as well?
No, but you know, like, Noel, think about it, right? You know, like, if we did not have that, for example, right? And it's very sad that not many people know about this. Also, everywhere I go, whenever I'm on stage, I make sure that I talk about this. That's like become one of my life missions. That I'm at least first going to tell people that, guys, your MPs don't matter. Or your MLAs also don't matter. What matters is their fingers and where they press it. But think about it. If we didn't have that, what would happen?
Okay. Then it would just be an authoritarian thing. Like if you didn't have the voting system.
If you didn't have this anti-defection thing where you're not ordering people around.
Then at least there would be some point to the role of an MP.
Yep.
You know, like I'd wake up, I as an MP would wake up and be like, oh, I have work to do. Like, I need to wake up early. I need to read stuff and whatnot, hire a few people to do. In fact, I'd be going for funding, asking for funding for office supplies. Like if the government is giving me just 40,000 whatnot, I'd go to my people and be like, hey, listen, I need like 1 lakh or X amount of money to do research on this thing that will help our constituency for your laws and whatnot. So let's just get, I think my MP would be more in the field about talking to us about how we can help his day-to-day work rather than get him re-elected. Like, you know, like re-election would not be a mudda as much as like, okay, I need to make sure. I mean, that's also far off.
I know, but that's true.
But like, at least there'd be some point to being an MP. Now that you're saying this, is just like, okay, you need to, it's like proxy. College ka proxy.
It is, yeah. So like, what would happen? Do you want to give a shot at this?
I mean, obviously the reason it was brought about was because people were changing parties so often that governments were falling and all of that. And there's some famous Haryana MLA who supposedly changed parties like multiple times in a day. So it was brought in for that. But again, the trend that we see is we take one problem statement and we want to solve that and we build something around it which is far more intrusive. So yahan par, for example, if you wanted this anti-defection law, you could have said, okay, when it comes to the matter of survival of the government, you cannot vote, you have to follow the whip, otherwise you'll be disqualified. Or to say that, look, you cannot change your parties in a certain way, etc., which is also there kind of in the law. But to say that you have to vote each and every time according to what the government tells you seems excessive, right? And that's that I think would be the problem why this was brought in. So therefore, I think it should be reduced to just saying that it's on matters of survival of the government. Maybe it's okay to have an anti-defection law. But you're absolutely right. I think when we have, if we do not have this kind of a law, as you rightly said, you'll kind of wake up in the morning as an MP and really apply your brains to the most pressing concerns of our country. We are, as a civilization, forget as a country, standing at a really complex time. Ab AI aane wala hai, kya kuch aane wala hai. God knows life is going to be so complex that no one person, no party boss in India can know all the answers. So obviously you need experts, you need MPs. MPs will get their expertise from other places and you need to have that kind of a conversation. In that sense, if we did not have this law, we would probably be passing much better laws for a very, very uncertain time that is about to hit our civilization.
And like I brought this up also because of your point, right? Which is, so like you make a point about how the laws that we make need to be more definite, more tightly written, right? More effective, right? Enforcement करने के लिए भी और लिखने के लिए भी, मतलब लिख के enforce करो. How will we do this in a system where this exists? Where this essentially...
What's the first knot to cut?
Exactly, right? I mean, like the anti-defection law is one of them. I would still say, like, for example, did you know that our bureaucrats can't be fired?
Government jobs se nikal nahi sakte is a thing that they originally say.
They have a permanent post, right? But the weird thing then is that one bureaucrat, if you have to get rid of that bureaucrat, they get transferred. Right, and there is like Ashok Khengkar type people who were transferred like somewhat 47 times in like their entire career. So like basically before he could change his bed sheets, he was transferred. It was bizarre, like how that happened to him. That is a flaw as well, right? So we speak about the laws written. Now we speak about the enforcement, where this bureaucrat who is being bounced around based on who is in power is also expected to implement very shitty laws. So is that like, I mean, the point you're making is that the government can be effective, but can it though in the current system?
I mean, we have to, obviously these are the things we have to change. I mean, one question that, or one aspect which I think people really need to realize is, why is our government set up in this way? What's the historical context behind it?
Sure.
And I think if you take something like the police, right, a lot of us are just very afraid of being in the police station, right? And the Supreme Court judge made this observation that people are more afraid of being in the police station than outside. why is the police this way, right? And then you have to kind of unpack the history and go back to say that the Britishers obviously intentionally set it up this way because what was their challenge was to discipline and control the population, which is why the police kind of almost reports into the home minister or whatever at the state level. And it's meant to be something that is not engaged with the local community. There's no kind of trust building that is done there. Whereas if you compare that to how the UK set up the police in their own homes country, they set up very differently. Out there, the local community, the local councillors, etc., are far more involved with how the police works. They have independent checks. There are entire departments set up to monitor how the police works. Even the kind of things they set up in the US, for example, were much better because they were intending to be there as settlers, not as colonizers. So wahan par, for example, right now in New York, as much as people talk about police brutality in the US, but in New York, for example, and that's there in a lot of other US cities as well, there is an independent body consisting of non-police people who basically audit the work of the police. So if someone has a complaint that police has manhandled me, they can go to that body, which will then hold police accountable, suspend people in the police, terminate them, etc. That's the reason in India we did not have that, right? While we became independent, we wrote a great constitution, some might argue, but we took on the everyday aspects, we really took a lot of the structures that the British had left us, because of which we are now in this state in the country where we have a lot of, what one might argue, inefficient or not poorly designed government institutions. And you can't just bring so people say, for example, we'll have a new data privacy regulator and we are going to design the best in the world data privacy regulator. You can't do that. Transplantation doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
You average it out very quickly. You get the best people, but then that becomes average very quickly. So the pessimism is that things almost won't change. Kitna change kar loge, right? You can't change each and every aspect of government. So I think a lot of people feel very pessimistic about that, but at least the way I think of it is, it's a lifelong struggle, right? You try to do that, get a little better at governing yourself every day and things get better. And when people feel too pessimistic, the one thing I tell them is, look, we've only had 70, 80 years to do this. The British did this ever since Magna Carta, so they've been at it for 800, 900 years. The Americans have been
still complaining.
Yeah, they're still complaining. Exactly.
It's okay.
And the Americans have been at this for a couple of hundreds of years. So I think it's still early, but I think I do feel that yes, it's only when we change these structures of government will actual change come. Otherwise, we'll have the same of everything, right? I mean, for example, people complain a lot about media censorship right now, and for good reason. But let's be clear, the first book that got banned in India, in independent India, was a retelling of the Ramayana. Who banned it? Nehru banned it.
Yes.
Right? So this same thing has been misused previously. If you think, abhi bahut baat hoti hai about misuse of the governor's office, ki governors do this, governors do that, etc., etc. Before a Supreme Court judgment in the 1990s, uske pehle to state governments used to be changed like overnight. So it was misused, including who was the first person to actually use it? It was Nehru, who used it to remove a government in Kerala, which was the first democratically elected communist government in the world. So clearly, it doesn't matter who's in power. To some extent, it doesn't matter who's in power. We have to change these structures for us to really become a stronger country.
That's the thing. Like the system itself. The way I describe it is like, it's like a stage. Like where the actors keep coming and going and performing. But if the planks on the stage are broken, they'll all trip on the same plank and fall down. And then the audience laughs. The problem is the stage. You have to fix the stage and then perform whatever plays you have to perform. But nobody looks at the stage though. And why is that? I want to understand, and this is very frustrating for me as a public policy professional who has worked in many capacities. Even with journalism, when I was covering the parliament, right? Everything that I did seems pointless because of the law that I told you. Why is this? How do we change this?
In fact, one might argue is getting worse, right? We were discussing about how do you even get people engaged in this topic, and now in a generation where our attention span is like 30 to 60 seconds, to tell tell someone that you have to be at this for the rest of your life, you can't make that. It's difficult to convince people of that. I think it's much easier to say, hey, defund the police, or these kind of hashtags which come up and you kind of participate in that movement, you participated in the Anna Hazare movement or whatever else. To say that day in, day out you have to do this is something I think many of us as citizens are unwilling to sign up for, because we want instant gratification as human beings.
Yeah.
So if that instant gratification isn't there, if you know nothing immediate is going to change, then why try to change it at all. The second thing is, I think there is a lot of complexity in this space. Like if you, exactly as you said, anti-defection law, not too many people know about it, right? And there's so many laws. How much can a citizen be expected to even know these laws? And which is why people don't know, and kind of they live in a little bit of that ignorance. I think those are the reasons why people don't really talk about the structures as much, and it's left to the public policy professionals to do that.
Yeah, but like Noel, we started this conversation with whether people would be interested in this at all, right? Which is like structural changes, right? When I told you about this law, when he talks about the police, when I told you about the bureaucracy, do you feel pessimistic? How do you feel now? I mean, just generally.
So, the more I come to know about, and this has been a journey since, since I wrote a show on cops, so before that I had that very typical point of view of a citizen that cops have, and the way cops are portrayed is either hero or like prime minister, minister ka chela types. Okay? But after that, after you come to know the inner workings of how complex things are, then there is an empathy for cops. Then you realize, okay, how within this house of cards, which is fragile, they figure out a way to sort of make a moral choice. Choose lesser between two evils, vagera, kuch bhi. So as and this is the same thing happens when like good shows and all, like for example when you watch The Wire, you realize ki, okay, what is the intricacy of how a city works.
Yeah.
So I think if you give people the lowdown about this stuff, typically it's shown in a very dry manner. I mean, our civics textbooks is not a good representation of how the country is run, because there are hardly any examples of, okay, this is how this law was passed. There's no context to how the law was passed or why it came around. Why do we have representatives as opposed to like a direct leader? We were just told ki, okay, US में president को straight away elect करते, हम लोग representative है. Why did we choose that? That is never told to us. So in general, I feel like the way things are told to us is not contextually, but just like bullet point.
Right.
And hence there is a bias towards the subject itself. But if someone can explain astrophysics through a reel,
right,
then that means everything can be brought down to a point where stuff can be understood.
Which is what I was coming to, right? Subhashish, the point you made, like the 60-second reel, right? I did this. I did make a reel on anti-defection law, right? And that is one of my most popular reels on my Instagram today, right? Where I said, did you know that your MP is basically a bag of meat pressing buttons, right? I mean, like it was very clickbaity, obviously. But the information was that, look, there is a law here, this is what happens, and did it in 60 seconds, right? I was thinking, more people... even like for example comedians like Noel, right? Now that you know about this, right? I feel like more effort can be put into making this more digestible. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think people really do care, right? I mean, I think a lot of us, for example, those of us somewhat older, would have participated in the anti-corruption movement in some way, if not to show up as a protest, at least to kind of do the texting and missed call and all of that. Many of us would have shown up in the Nirbhaya movement that happened. There have been these moments throughout, even in the last couple of decades, where people have just shown up. I think the point is that people care. In fact, I think I was reading some statistic which said that almost at least a third of kind of young Indians have shown up physically at a protest.
Yeah.
Okay.
So clearly people care. It's just, I think the public policy community's focus also perhaps need to shift a little bit from staying a little bit on those echo chambers to actually having these kind of conversations with people outside. And I think that has to be the journey of making this more digestible, more understandable, etc., so that more people can participate in this conversation. And as all of us start speaking more about it, I do think change at some point will happen.
Okay.
And my effort throughout in the last 5 years has been exactly this, which is I saw Parliament, I saw all the shitty things in Parliament, and I was like, mujhe kisi ko to batana hai. And then the thing is that I had the option of either doing like journalism, going into academics, etc., or I was like, main to video banayega, and I like try to make it digestible, funny, whatever it is, right? Tried to do it in a way that I could, right? When I started off, Subhashish, and I don't understand this, maybe you'll help me understand this. When I started off, my thing was, I'm a dumb fuck. Because, I mean, genuinely, I had no idea about how Parliament functions before I went in. I just had on-ground experience, right? I had no policy backing, no law, nothing. So when I came out, I was thinking like you, Noel. I was like, nahin, I know how to write. So I will just write whatever I understand and I will do it in video form, right? And I was like, since I'm a dumb fuck, then there are much more smarter people who will be able to do this. So I was like, I can create a replicable model. Like I would write like articles with GIF in it. I would do videos with memes in it, right? It's easy to do. It's crazy how nobody else has done this, and I keep waiting for people to say that, oh look, so like, you know, I can replicate like a constitution, I can replicate like a article that he wrote on BuzzFeed. Why doesn't that happen?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit also of incentives, right? I mean that you can't, especially in the policy space in India, because we don't necessarily, our structures of policy making aren't very participative, right? As we were discussing that you have laws which people don't even, MPs don't know that a law is about to come and suddenly they're called to wait for it. If you know as a public policy professional that you will not even get the opportunity to really participate in policy, then what are you doing in the first place? So I think therefore, I'm sure these people who could have potentially done what you did must be thinking, what's the whole point of all of this?
Yeah.
Main kya ukhad lunga? Right. So I think therefore that change will possibly happen with a few more role models, with a few more people. They'll see this person's done this has worked well, etc., and then it kind of becomes a thing. I think a lot of kind of policy spaces have grown in that way. When I joined technology policy in 2016 and participated in that space, it was very small, but as it's become more popular, more people know about it now. There's been at least a community of a few hundred people who are participating about this. So I think the beginning is always difficult. So as you've kind of, hopefully as you've kind of made that change and talking about these issues in a more digestible way, hopefully more people will do that as well.
I really hope so. Noel, please.
And to be honest, if they really care, they will have to. Like when I wrote this book, I realized that if I reel nahi bananga, koi nahi padhne wala ye book. So I had to make a reel.
No, I mean, like I was thinking as you guys were talking, like one of the persons who got people interested in this is in the US, in American politics, at least young people, was Jon Stewart.
Yes.
You know, who people would tune in to watch that show. Now, granted, maybe 100% is not accurate. Maybe he may have a bias, whatever it is. But people were interested in what's happening in their country. John Oliver does the same thing at this point over issues. So it is possible to give like a lowdown of like intense topics. I mean, Scam 92 did that with something as dry as the stock market.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Immediately people were interested in this whole thing, and suddenly on my YouTube feed, I saw like old stockbrokers explaining what happened and young people asking them questions.
Right.
Ki ye kya tha?
Yeah.
You know, so interest will always be there if the question is formed well. And we are moving over there slowly because the idea of because you can make a YouTube channel about anything now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And dude, my feed is full of geometry sums at 28. It's full of geometry sums.
Yeah.
And the guy has got like 100,000. There's a physics teacher from somewhere in North India who has a web series on him right now.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? The physics wala guy.
Yeah.
So it's and it's not anything new. I mean, one of the most craziest hashtags was Squished India.
Yeah.
You know, and Simon Go Back.
Right.
Up until now we keep saying shit like that.
Yeah.
So I think that human way of getting attracted to topics, if they are presented in a good way, and now there is incentive. Matlab, like, I mean, no one can tell me that a social media influencer doesn't have incentives to create stuff which is engaging. You know, and and I've seen lawyers dance to laws and tell us what you can do in case a cop catches you.
Yeah.
And they're dancing to the tune of some like Baby Shark or something. So if that shit is happening, then eventually we will find our Jon Stewart. You know, eventually we'll find our John Oliver. Like it may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, it may happen 5 years down the line.
And you know, there's this conventional wisdom which I think is thrown around a lot, which is like, 60 seconds mein hi sab kuch batana padega, right? I mean, which is like why you also made a reel, honestly. I was also like in this same camp, like very shorter videos, short attention span. I would have never thought that I would be doing a 1 hour plus podcast and anybody would be listening. I look at my analytics, log dekh rahe, 27 minute average view duration hamara hai.
In fact, the reel and the short wala thing is a great way to pull people in.
Exactly.
You know what? Hey, here's instead of watching 1 hour of one thing. Here's 10 things to watch within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I'll show you 10 things, 30 second ka reel.
Yeah.
I'll show you 10 interesting things. And then I go and I search for the one which I found the most interesting.
And also
And
like the long winding conversation about which we are having right now about government and its effectiveness. And so content wise, I feel like this is very interesting. I also watch a lot of this, to be honest, like American content, like 3.5 hours ka podcast, etc. But sorry, digressing, I want to come to the last point, which I think you also raised earlier, which I want to get back to. I want to know what the future of government will look like, right? Assuming that we sort of don't figure out how to fix the system or whatever it is there a alternative to democracy?
I don't think there needs to be an alternative to democracy. I think we just need to get better at democracy, right? I mean, there's one aspect, which is electoral democracy, and many might argue that we do some reasonable thing of that as India. But again, I want to, I feel like a perennial optimist in this context, because look at the grand history of humankind itself. Right? We had kind of organized religion, which one might assume in those days was probably fairly oppressive.
Yeah.
Then we had monarchies. We had kind of kingdoms came about, empires came about, etc. And it's only like democracy itself, or kind of participatory democracy in this way, is fairly new. So I do feel there's a natural pressure because people, once their roti kapda makan issues are done, start asking higher order questions of, do I have agency over my life or not?
Right.
And then I think that introduces a certain discipline in the way that governments work. Even today, for example, even with the brutest of majority in the Lok Sabha, a party cannot do whatever the hell it wants. It has to really, for example, India's never, in the Indian government, if it really wanted at some point in time, could have just printed as many notes as it wanted. It did not do that. Why? Because inflation hoga, people will complain about it, etc., etc. So there are these, what I might call soft guardrails that put some checks and balances around what a government can and cannot do, and I think over time these are just going to become stronger, especially because of the spread of technology. I think people now have got it's far more easier to mobilize both online and offline. I think people make their voices heard far more easily. The Save the Internet campaign, for example, made it very easy for people to participate. At the click of the button, you could just send a letter to your MP, etc. And I think that technology is going to obviously make it far easier for people to be able to participate in the democratic process. So it's going to make democracies and governments stronger. At the same time, it's also going to empower the kind of people who want to do wrong things. Misinformation is much easier. It's far more easier to manipulate people, what Russia did in the US or whatever else, right? I mean, even kind of what might happen within countries. Most countries are known to procure kind of misinformation services or disinformation services. So there's going to be that kind of fight between moving democracy in the right direction and moving democracy in the wrong direction. And I think therefore it's left to people to actually wake up and talk about this in a way so that it goes in the right direction. Just to give you an example, after the First World War, Germany and the Scandinavian countries were in a very similar state. Obviously, Great Depression hua tha, there was lots of unemployment, social unrest, etc., etc. The way the two countries and their populations and politicians dealt with it was very different. In the Scandinavian countries, they started forming coalitions. They said, Acha, I'm a party representing farmers, there's a party representing the workers, let us be in alliance, etc. Let us aim for the common good. And now we know that they're the happiest countries in the world. And we know what happened to Germany after the First World War, went straight into the Second World War, right? So I think we have these, it's almost like the Robert Frost poem, right? We have these two paths diverging in the wood. And for us, it's especially challenging as India because we are genuinely a unique country. Like at this level of income, to have a democracy of the kind that we have is unparalleled in human history. We also have kind of two paths diverging before us, and I think as citizens, we have to figure out which path to go. So I feel optimistic overall, but I do think it's going to require a lot more involvement, especially of young people. Because if you come to think of it, why should people in their 70s and 80s who probably, with all respect to them, not going to live that long, determine the policies of the country, right? So I think it's a lot more about young people getting involved in this conversation.
Frankly, if like the voting buttons have an upgrade and it's an LCD screen, I won't trust those guys to adapt quickly. Fuck, we don't vote like this, dude. You'll have to employ one lamp to teach them.
Fair point. But Noel, do you know the Save the Internet movement? Do you remember it?
Yeah, it was what, 2016?
2017, I think.
16,
17, yeah.
I'd heard of it, dude, but I don't think I can tell you anything.
I what gives me hope is movements like, just to briefly tell people who don't know. So there was this time when the internet was about to be split into lanes, essentially, where telecom operators were sort of being allowed to give separate data packs to people who pay more, and the speeds would be regulated according to that, and there were paywalls being put, basically like a Facebook paywall or whatever paywall, and for limited services. So like Facebook came in saying ki if you get like a particular phone with a particular network, then you can access Facebook for free. So essentially it creates a walled garden. So people don't even discover that there is an internet outside.
Correct.
And that has happened in a few countries. So I think Subhashish was also a part of that movement of sorts, and there were a bunch of people who came together, including our office back then, and we decided that we need to start a movement to save the internet, to not let this happen. And what that movement came up with was we got AIB involved. We wrote a script
that's
for
how
them.
I know it.
Exactly,
from.
right? So
we
got them involved.
This is like they were trying to create वो discos में होता है ना, sorry, discos बोल रहा हूँ, night club वगैरह में होता है ना कि there's a special room, VIP lounge type for the internet. They were trying to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like exactly that, right? And then we helped them write the script, right? And the call to action there was write a letter to TRAI, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, saying that we don't want this. And the thing is, we created a template of that email, right? And we put it into a machine. Basically, you just had to click it and the email would go. Our initial objective was to DDoS them, but I mean, obviously, like,
what is DDoS?
DDoS is basically you send so much traffic to a website that it crashes. But yeah,
and even in the right to information movement, right? The way they built up that movement in Rajasthan was through a lot of kind of these nukkad nataks, and they translated the issue of corruption into something that, song and music, etc. And there'll be people who kind of go around and like talk about this through the medium of art. So I think as much as people think these are boring topics, etc., if you think of it, right to information, one might argue, was the last major institutional change that happened in India, where it fundamentally redistributed power between citizens and state. And that happened as a result of a popular movement, not in the court, not elsewhere, etc. But that said, I mean, even if I look back at how some of these laws really very fundamentally affect our lives. If you think of the Aadhaar movement, for example, when people were opposed to the Aadhaar, they went to the court, they said this violates right to privacy. Then the court said, is there a right to privacy? And people might argue, this is a very kind of theoretical question. What is right to privacy? Sab to ho gaya hai, matlab sabke paas mera data hai, Facebook ke paas hai, government ke paas hai. How does this matter? But I think it makes such tangible change. Once the Supreme Court said there's right to privacy, they said, okay, based on that now, you cannot actually criminalize homosexuality. So then that got decriminalized, and that's had impact on, I presume, like tens of millions of people, if not more. Similarly, adultery got stuck down, right? So a lot of these changes happen, right? And it's a really complex web, and I think probably, Meghnad, that's why people don't participate, because it's so complex, what leads to what, etc. There's no direct causality. So thoda mushkil ho jata hai for people to also understand at what point in this system do I come and intervene. But I do think change happens, and therefore that's the kind of cause of my optimism here.
And again, that's what I was coming to. Like, I'm also feeling optimistic because, say for example, I played a small role in the Save the Internet movement, which means that we have an internet which is free, which means that we were able to oppose Aadhaar, which means that we were able to, like, that movement also we did a little bit. So then we got a right to privacy, which means that homosexuality was sort of decriminalized because that law was also used. So like there is this chain of events which makes me hopeful that even if you do like this little thing in this little random thing that has happened, it can lead to such cascading effects, which kind of makes me hopeful, I would say.
No, optimism to hai. It's just very cautious optimism. I just know it can go off the rails at any point of time.
Yeah, but when I say future of government, just last thing that I wanted to say was when with AI coming in, right? With AI like really coming in now, right? Do you see any change in governance?
So I do think obviously things will change, right? I mean, one might say, any piece of technology, at least how I think of technology is technology increases your capacity to do good or to do bad. What you do is up to you. Right? So similarly, for example, when Aadhaar was older, it improved our capacity to do well. It also improved our capacity to do evil things. So I don't think it's so much like AI will fundamentally change the power imbalance. It can move the power imbalance in either direction. It can make government and governance so much better that it empowers citizens, etc. Or it can make government so powerful that it can do surveillance far more easily. It can kind of control people far more easily. So I think of technology as just moving us along rather than solving this disequilibrium. And this is where a lot of people, for example, there's this book on the narrow corridor, and basically what that book talks about is that every time you increase the power of the government, you also need to increase the power of citizens and society. And so if AI is used only to increase power of government, then perhaps we will go further into this disequilibrium of government and democracy and all of that. But if AI can also be harnessed in a way, for example, can AI make it far more easier for people to participate in the legislative process? Can AI really summarize laws far more easily and give me the top 5 bullet points, etc.? Right? That would be pretty fantastic use of AI. So I do think that we have to make sure that the applications of AI are also ones that empower citizens, and that's the only way we kind of start protecting democracy.
You know,
Which way to stop?
Just the battery. He's just changing the battery, and then I'm just wrapping up after this.
I just was imagining like feeding the preamble to one of the AIs, and then it just goes through the constitution and says these laws violate preamble.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I've already tried that. Bad at it right now. I mean, I've tried to make it read laws and try to simplify it. Indian laws के साथ ज़्यादा नहीं कर रहा है कुछ वो. I mean, but the stark thing is it keeps changing every week.
Yeah.
It's just learning so fast.
So look at it as like a 3-year-old that's like growing up.
Yeah. So what I did was, I used Bing to. So there's this Bing Copilot, right? So now you can type ki, what am I looking at? Can you summarize it? I opened this shitty Xerox which the government offices give. Which they scan and put it up online. I asked it to summarize it. It was like, I can't read it, right? And then I was doing a video on if AI can write a speech. And so I tried this again to show that it can't read this. It actually read it.
Oh, acha, within a few days or something.
Yeah, within like a difference of a week, it started reading these Xeroxes that the government is putting out.
Because it's that's the thing. That's how Tesla is also getting better at the self-driving thing. Every Tesla car, analyzes the data of its driving. Yeah. And sends it to the server and whatnot. And then like whatever changes need to be made. Because like if I'm in Bombay, my car does not know how to drive on Delhi roads. Okay, but if your car is there, immediately my car gets an update कि Delhi के road पे ऐसे चलाना है. अच्छा. So like the whole system of how AI is it's always going to be an exponential growth because of that.
Okay, resuming? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the point that I wanted to come at in the end is the AI usage, which you said. I think, Yuval Noah Harari has talked about this as well, where if the government harnesses AI, I think the real world impact of that is quite scary because surveillance, for example, right now, if the government has power to tap phones, right? There was this weird case where I think outside Yogi Adityanath's house there was a protest going on of potato farmers. They dumped potatoes in front of his house and left. So Yogi Adityanath ordered the tapping of 10,000 phones to find out who did this. And they did find the people who did this. So there are like infinite powers in a way which the government has. Now if you combine that with AI, 10,000 phones are tapped. Not every phone can be heard by humans. Yeah. I mean, you need people to also hear what people are saying in 24 hours. Now, if you assign an AI to do that, transcribe it, and then give you like the summary of what these 10,000 people are doing, you don't need to have agents. It's like agents following us around in our pockets, which is scary. And that is why my question came in, where the future of democracy, even not just the alternative of democracy, but this broken system, can it get worse?
It definitely can get worse, right? But at some level, look, some of these things stay with us, right? Which is that, for example, when back in the day before everything else, people had to do riots and they had to identify who should we attack. They had the electoral list, right? So they would take off the electoral list, look at people's names and know ki kahan jaake kisko attack karna hai, right? So that has always existed. Now it's become digitized, so it's become far easier to do that, and it's going to become even easier to do that. But the point was the challenges of democracy that we had 30 years ago when that physical model of attacking people was there. that was broken even then. New challenges, new world. We have to come up with new challenges. We have to come up with new solutions to be able to do so. So while I understand the problems would probably go like 10, 100x, but it's still the fundamental problem here. Why should there be phone tapping at all? What should be the process before you order a phone tap, etc.? One might argue in many cases you will not even come to know, and this might be done surreptitiously, etc. But whether or not AI processes the phone tap or human processes the phone tap, I think the more fundamental question is, how could you order a phone tap?
Yes.
Right? So I think those are the higher order questions that we have to work on, and then the rest of it, let's hope that we stay lucky as a civilization.
Yeah.
Here's to the AI terrorist coming up who just blows off your window.
Noel, any final question, observation?
Yes. So a lot of the examples that you gave us about laws and how government overreaches there, a lot of it is about basic citizen ka freedom. How much of this changing of laws and all is dependent on us as citizens changing our definition of freedom? Like whenever I look at citizens around, the idea of individual freedom is still not properly conceptualized in their head, which is why the Equal Marriage Act, that is marriage equality discussion right now, wherein it's more about what the society thinks a marriage is rather than what an individual thinks a marriage is. So how much of this change is dependent on the fact that citizens understand individual freedom more?
Yeah, so I think it is completely is, right? So even though I write my book and a lot of people who participate in public policy are all about laws and rules and regulations and government, but at the end of the day, laws and rules and government and regulation reflect what people truly believe. What people truly believe, the culture, etc., is all what we call informal institutions.
Okay.
And what we all talk about are formal institutions. Both have, like, the informal institutions really affect formal institutions. How does that happen? For example, in the US, on the marriage equality question itself, in 1993, Supreme Court of Hawaii said that, okay, we are going to now look at whether we can actually legalize homosexual couples or not. The very fact that they did that actually led to a counter reaction. Okay. A lot more laws came in completely banning same-sex couples. So all these movements that happened in the judiciary were soon undone by the people and by legislatures in the US. Okay. 2003, there was Massachusetts brought, the Supreme Court made some progress and people came back and actually reversed all of that. In 2004, 11 states explicitly banned it with a margin of 70%, saying that we should not have same-sex marriage. That's when people who actually cared about marriage equality launched public communication campaign and said, let us change hearts and minds. Laws cannot change unless hearts and minds change. So they launched a lot of campaigns. In fact, the most effective campaign that they saw was not about, this is my right and therefore I should have it, but this was about grandparents who came on shows and said, look, I have gay grandchildren, I want them to be happy. So they framed the narrative as one of freedom leading to happiness and something bigger than yourself. And that's when now in the US the majority actually supports same-sex marriage. Therefore, all the recent things that have happened, like the Supreme Court permitting same-sex marriage, is a lot more sustainable. So to your question, we can all keep playing law, regulation and rules, but I think there's a lot more work to be done in actually going forward and making this case to people. So on freedom, for example, we've never in India had a truly kind of what one might call a classical liberal party, which says that less government hona chahiye, both in our economic and political life. In fact, some people argue in economic sphere, India doesn't even have a right-wing party. Everyone's left. So I do think there's a little bit of reimagination going to the people, etc., and having these conversations a lot more, which will create the will and the political will for more freedoms.
So Noel, first we enter politics, right? Then we do mass movements to change the anti-defection law.
Okay.
Are you in?
I'll do it. I'm telling so much. I mean, a please with some sugar on top would have helped, but okay, fine.
But thank you guys. Thank you so much for this wonderful episode of How to Citizen. Explain like I'm 10. How to Citizen is the other show which you can also watch, by the way. Just saying. You are watching this show on the All About Now feed. We have two other shows. One is Page 10, which is hosted by Abbas Momin. It's a gist of basically what is happening around the world in the last week. If you don't follow news, you should follow that podcast because that's what we do there. The second show is, of course, this, which is Explain Like I'm 10. And the third show is How to Citizen, where we read 7th grade civics books with famous people. So that has ended by the time I think this episode goes. Please do go back and watch the entire season. Like, share, subscribe, do all of that. I would also recommend you go back and watch the episode called How to Enter Politics, because I think this is the part 2 of that episode where Noel was also there, where we spoke to Aparajita Bharti about how to enter politics. This was about whether it has any point at all. So that's what it was. But thank you so much, guys, for doing this. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye.